This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to Believe in People, a British podcast award-winning series about all things addiction, recovery and stigma. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today we have the first of a special two-part episode and we're joined by guest Sarah Hicks, a remarkable woman whose journey through trauma, addiction and recovery offers powerful insights into the realities of substance use, domestic abuse and personal transformation. In this two-part episode, Sarah courageously shares her story of growing up with substance use, navigating abusive relationships and the profound impact of loss and grief. Her story is one of struggle, survival and ultimately, strength. In this deeply honest conversation, Sarah opens up about the cycles of addiction, the quest for love and connection and the turning points that have shaped her recovery. I begin the conversation by asking Sarah about her experiences with substances and how those experiences have shaped both her recovery and the work that she does today.
That kind of started when I was 10 years old, really. Me and my friend, we went into recovery within 2 weeks of each other back in 2018. And we used to kind of steal hooch bottles off my mum and dad. And we used to sit in the loft and drink them. And the loft wasn't like converted or anything, so we could have fell through at any time. And it just progressed and progressed, you know, that kind of almost natural progression of addiction. Went on to cannabis. Then when I was 16, it was cocaine and ecstasy and things like that. And yeah, it just spiraled and spiraled. And I think, you know, I did it. When I look back, I always felt when I was young, I always felt a little bit different. I always felt very scared. I just didn't have any confidence whatsoever. And when I used to go to school, I used to be petrified. Like, I remember walking to school and there was some girls at our school and they used to stop us and search us for cigarettes and things, and I just used to let them do it. So frightened, I was so scared of like hate or being embarrassed in front of everybody. So I think as well, the more I drank, smoked weed and whatever, it just gave me that confidence, to be who I thought I wanted to be, at the time. And yeah, and I think that just went on and like, when I was 16, I was in a relationship with a woman and that's who I started taking cocaine with. And again, I just thought it was like weekend stuff when I went out and whatnot. But then I came out of that relationship and got into another relationship. And it was very abusive. Very, very abusive. And I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah. How old was you when you got into this abusive relationship?
17.
Very, very young then, isn't it?
Yeah.
You understand when you say you don't understand it's abusive, because at that age, all these experiences are first-time experiences, so therefore you take them as normal because it's the first time experiencing them in some way.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that then.
So in 2003, I lost my granddad. He was poorly, he'd been poorly for years. And I didn't want to lose him, but it was a bit of a blessing in disguise. When he went, because he'd been poorly for so long, it was like he kind of needed to go. He'd had 2 heart attacks. He'd had about 7 strokes, mini strokes, big strokes. He'd just been so poorly for so long. And I'd just kind of come out of this relationship with a woman because my parents wouldn't allow me to be in a relationship with a woman. So it kind of propelled me into this other relationship, really. And very quickly, like, there would be incidences where I would be out with him, and I remember specifically this night. I remember a lot of things, but when you remember specifics. And we was on Holness Road, and we'd been on a night out, and we was on the way home, and we didn't live far from each other. So we was walking and a guy from across the road sort of went, Sarah, and he like waved at me. And I went, all right. And I turned round and my partner at the time just went, ooh, you slag. And he just used to say things like that to me all the time, call me awful, awful names, prosage, stuff like that. And I just remember at the time, but I was so desperate for him to love me. I just thought, what can I do? What can I do? And I was like, oh, please don't. And I was crying and I was like begging him, please don't do this. Please don't do this. And he just walked off and left me in the middle of like Wilderness Road. And I remember going home and I remember ringing his house phone and his mum picked up and I was like, I don't know what's just happened, blah, blah, blah. And his mum said, oh, just wait for him to wake up tomorrow, kind of thing. So, and then I rang him because I was so desperate, because he was like, he's quite a well-known guy, like a lot of the girls wanted to be with him. I thought, I'd been such a geek at school, I thought I'd made it, and I thought, God, somebody loves me, somebody like that loves me. And and things like that just happened all the time. And I just constantly go back. And then I remember my friend, I'll never forget her saying it to me, my friend at the time. She went, he does it because he loves you. It's just his head goes about you, So I thought, oh my God, so that's what I thought. I thought it was because he loved me so much that, and also I was, like I say, I was just desperate for him to love me. And
was just going back to that, like the incident you're talking there, was that like the first type of abuse that you experienced with him? And was it the verbal abuse and that it started?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I can see. I completely understand what where you're coming from with it and how it can. I'm interested how it escalated from that point as well, because from what I'm hearing there is you're feeling like you're in the wrong as well because you said hello to someone. Like, it's almost like your friend has kind of justified the behaviour by saying he's doing it because he loves you, and that only. Do you know what I mean? It kind of just reaffirms it with you in terms of the way that you was thinking anyway, which isn't healthy really in any respects. How did it escalate from the verbal abuse then? And how, can I just ask, was he older than you or was he the same age? Because 17 is quite young for the...
8 years.
So he was 8 years old. So I think at 25, they know exactly what they're doing as well with that, don't they? And
I think my mum and dad, they were happy when I got in a relationship with him, but then they wouldn't let me be...
With a woman either. I was going to comment as there's the irony there, like, to have that belief of not wanting to be with a woman, but then being okay with you being in a relationship, which clearly isn't, I know what I'd rather for my daughter, to be honest, naturally. Tell me a little bit more than how that behaviour escalated.
So, I mean, my mum and dad did try with him, and there were things that I didn't tell him. I remember being at his house one night and he'd gone through my phone, he started calling me a slag, pushed me out the side of the bed. There was loads. It started off like shoves and things like that, and then when, like... he'd be drunk and things like that, it'd escalate even further. But it was always more around what he would say about me and like the jabs, like the bad words, the nasty words, like I say, the prosy, the dyke, I got dyke a lot, just all these really, really hurtful words. And like that kind of like control, just it kind of kept me with him really, because I already thought before I got with him, because I've done a lot of work around my childhood and stuff, I already thought I was worthless, and then I thought he was this big, powerful, like magnificent king giant. There was no way that I was going to get any better than him, so it was just, so I stayed, but as well, I got caught pregnant and my mum and dad was absolutely devastated. But then I had a miscarriage. So, yeah, it was really, really upsetting at the time. I was only 18. My head was all over. I was obviously in an abusive relationship, didn't know. I'd only a year ago been told I wasn't allowed to be with a woman, just all these different things. I'd been bullied at school, just all this stuff kept constantly like slamming me down.
It feels like so many aspects of your life are under control by external. Yeah.
Massively.
You're just going to implode at that point, aren't you? Getting it from all those different angles, yeah. School, peers, parents, relationships. Yeah, I can see
I watched Me, Myself and Irene recently. And you know where he kind of implodes because he's being controlled by that many people?
Yeah.
I was thinking about it the other day and I was thinking, that was me. That was me. I wanted to scream out. I wanted to have this voice, but I just had to be certain things to certain people so many times.
You're playing a character to every single person. Do you know what I mean? Like, even go back to the substance misuse, it's a character. It's who you think you want to be, rather than this timid person at school being, bullied by girls at the school gates, being the person that your parents want you to be, being the person that this, boyfriend wanted you to be.
Yeah.
I can see how you'd want to implode, especially at that age, because it is such a... They're pivotal years, I think, finding yourself, as a teenager and then coming into... it's real weird. I kind of feel like you... At that point in your life, and for me especially, you feel like you're following a path, and then suddenly you get to 16, 17 and you've gone from primary school to secondary school where everything's laid out in front of you, and then the road just comes to an end and you're in an open field and you don't know which way to go. Yeah. And it's really pivotal time in your life where you're trying to find out, okay, who am I, where do I go now? And you can't even really explore those because you are being controlled still in all these different areas.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I didn't realise at the time, but I just had this big void, and all I wanted was to be loved. That's all I wanted, was to be loved. And
did you not get love from your parents then as a child? Did you not feel loved by them? Where does that come from, this needing to be loved?
I think, do you know what? And I have been thinking about this recently as well. My mum and my dad worked a lot of hours, like 12-hour shifts. I remember him being on shutdown for about, I think it was a good solid 2 years, like 6.5 days a week. And he did a lot of training and stuff. And I remember, we'd be sat and we'd be watching the TV. And my mum would go, I'd be shouting at my dad for age. I'd go, Dad, 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 and he wasn't answering me. And he used to do this thing where he used to tickle his tash while he was watching the telly. And in the end, my mum would go, Ronnie, like that. And he'd go, what? The bane's shouting here. But he was knackered. He was absolutely knackered. And my mum, when I was young, she worked as well. She worked part-time up until I got a little bit older. She always wanted the perfect house, and she wanted everything to be nice and clean and tidy because that's how she'd been brought up.
Yeah.
And I was an only child. And growing up, my dad had a previous marriage and they divorced, and then obviously got one my mum. And he had a son who was my brother. And we used to turn up a lot to go pick him up. And he wasn't there, his mum had sent him off fishing with his granddad or whatnot. And I used to see how gutted my dad used to be because I used to be with him. And all I wanted was my big brother.
Yeah.
And then I'd kind of tried telling my mum, and I just don't think she got it. And she'd be like, oh, well, you're all right. It don't matter. And I just remember just absolutely craving, God, I've got a big brother, and I wanted him in my life.
Connection, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
That sounds like something that you're striving for as a child and even as a young adult, is connection, isn't it, really? Yeah. That's kind of what I'm seeing here.
Absolutely. And it's really bizarre, though, because I've still got the same best friends as I had when I was 4 years old.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I think, a lot of it kind of came from that because me and my brother, we got in touch with each other in 2017 and we are in each other's lives now, and it's 7 years we've been in each other's lives, but it's still sometimes doesn't sink in with me that I've got a brother.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre. And I think all these different things left that void in me, which wanted that love. And, you know, I had that miscarriage, going back to when I was like 18. I had the miscarriage. I wanted to be pregnant again straight away.
Yeah.
So I just carried on having sex unprotected.
Yeah.
And I eventually got pregnant again. Again, my mum and dad was absolutely devastated. But they tried to kind of speak to the guy who I was with at the time.
Yeah.
And kind of build a relationship, but that lasted a few months and it just took a nosedive again. And I always kind of chose him over my parents. Because I was desperate. And then I got to about 20 odd weeks pregnant. And one night I'd gone back to the house and he didn't want me in the house. It was our house and he threw a telly at me. It didn't hit me and stuff. And I remember ringing my mum and dad screaming, crying, and my dad ran round and my dad was going to, you know, he was, yeah. And I remember thinking at the time, what's going on? But the severity of it didn't register with me. I still felt like a child myself. And yeah, and like they brought me away from him, but I'd go back. He'd ring me a week or two later. Yeah, you all right? And kind of gaslight me about it. Oh, come on, it wasn't that bad. And just that constant gaslighting was just constant all the way through. So I'm a little bit today, still a little bit defensive. Do you know, if people aren't taking me seriously or I feel like they've just undermined me there or they're undermining my feelings, that comes back for me. Yeah. You know, that comes back for me today. So then, I went back, got back with the guy, and there was a night, and he said he would just pop into shop, and he didn't. And I thought, where is he? And I was with my friend at the time, and I was 32 weeks pregnant, and I stormed to the pub to find him, and I went ballistic. I went crazy. I went mad. And we came out of the pub and we went back to the house. Anyway, the argument stopped. But then because my friend was in my house with me, he was accusing me of being a lesbian, you know, I'm having an affair, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So everything kind of got a bit out of control and my friend was there. And I tried kind of getting away from him and I slipped on we had laminate flooring at the time, and I fell to the floor. And I think I was out for a little bit, and my friend witnessed him kicking me in my stomach when I was 32 weeks pregnant.
Jesus.
Yeah, and I just remember an ambulance came, we went off to the hospital, and my dad was just devastated. Like, absolutely. It was devastating for my mum. But I always remember my dad being just completely devastated. And they took me through, and my dad, like they said, you have to report this to the police now, because I'd never reported anything. Reported it to the police, and there was an injunction out on him, and I wasn't allowed to speak to him and whatever. And weeks went by, and I was talking to my friend, and I was like, oh, I miss him. So she was like, why don't you ring him?
Is this the same friend that said that? It's just, this doesn't sound like a very good friend.
I think at the time, she was in the same place as I was.
Ah, okay, yeah.
You know, I do believe that. Well, I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
Makes a bit more sense now, yeah.
And I think it's that generational thing as well, Matt. You know, it's still see couples now, do you know, let's just not talk about it. Let's ignore it. You know, let's
move on.
You know, and just everything will be all right. You know, and yeah. And he was like a bit apprehensive about speaking to me on the phone, and I spoke to him and I was like, I'll retract my statement. No, that wasn't what I said straight away. I was talking to him and he said, oh, well, you know, if I'm going to see, I'm going to need you to do this. But I tried to retract my statement, but the CPS had enough to take it forward.
Yeah. Because they're going to think you're being coerced into retracting your statement as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
In some respects, yeah.
Yeah. Looking back, I think they did. So, yeah. But then it got to it was the day before it was my actual due date. And I'd arranged to see him. And I told my parents I was sleeping at a friend's house. And I went to sleep at his house. And, like, we did something and it brought kind of the birth on. And then we rang, I rang him and I said, you know, I wanted him to come to the hospital, and my dad just went.
Yeah.
My dad couldn't even be in the hospital while he was there. My mum stayed with me, even though they weren't talking. Yeah, and then I had my daughter. And I remember being in the hospital, bearing in mind I was only 19, and like my mum and dad didn't want to be there, do you know, while he was there and stuff. So they'd go and he'd come, and I remember the first day he went, oh, well, I'm off out to wet the baby's head. I can only stay about half an hour. And then he went off. And then I didn't hear anything till the next day. And it was just always like that, but that constant gaslighting as though, why are you being like that? You know, what? Oh, come on.
Yeah,
and then I'd get, oh, well, it's just him in it. That's just the way he is. Yeah. And, you know, off members of the family, off friends and whatnot.
Excuses the behaviour, doesn't it? When you've got, and if it's the people around you that you trust as well, and you listen to those opinions, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now.
Yeah. But my dad always knew. My dad's position never ever changed after that. Yeah. Ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as a parent myself, you know, and with a very, very young daughter, but I like to think that in some way, you know, that person that your daughter gets in a relationship with, that is the person that you are trusting to look after your daughter in your absence when you're gone, whether that be, you know, physically not there or, you know, whatever. And if he's got no trust for that person, and you wouldn't based on what happened at such a young age, he's never going to, you know, change his mind on that person. No. Was he aware of the assault and everything as well that had happened?
My dad?
Yeah. I don't think he could. I couldn't come. I know personally, if someone ever, you know, I just wouldn't be able to change my opinion on that person. No. So I completely understand why your dad was the way he was with him. That makes sense to me. How long was you with him?
On and off for 13 years.
Wow.
I'd split up with him for about 3 years.
Yeah. And then you get back together and things like that. Yeah. What was the worst moment in that relationship? What would you say the rock bottom of that relationship was? Because for this to happen, how old was your daughter when you broke up then? Was she 13 or?
11.
11.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean? This is all this that you did, this entire story so far has been up to the point of where she was born. And there's a lot there already in such a short space of time. So for 11 years, I imagine, of similar things as you've mentioned, the coercive control, the you know, the verbal abuse, the physical abuse. What was the worst thing that happened within those 11 years before you eventually broke up with him?
There was loads of things.
I imagine there's not a single pinpoint or anything. I guess, tell you what, I'll reframe my question a little bit. What was the moment then when you thought, fuck this, I can't be with this person anymore, enough's enough?
Right. I know, and I was just going to start talking about that.
Okay,
You've just said it.
Yeah.
So it was 2016. And I didn't know this until my friends told me, but he'd knocked me unconscious. So throughout our relationship, it was very codependent, and we did drink together a lot and use together a lot. But that wasn't only when things were shit.
Yeah.
You know, they always were. Every time we got back together, it was like, oh yeah, let's get this house, and we're going on these holidays, and we're doing this and doing that, and slowly but surely, I'd end up a quivering, anxious mess all over again. You know, and I still couldn't see it. And then one of my best friends, she's an amazing person. She went and did the social work degree. We both went to uni. I was 28, she was 29. And we went at the same time, and she did the social work degree, and she'd done some placement at DAP. She'd had a job at Purple House. So she'd been learning about this stuff, and she'd started to see what was going on with me. And it isolated me that bad again. There was only her who was willing to start coming, you know, carry on coming to my house. Everybody else was just a bit like, you know, or I'd just not really bother with people. And I remember this one night, he'd been out, he'd not come home, been dossing wherever, again, and I thought, I've had enough. And I'm not proud to say, but my daughter was there, and he'd come in and he'd just got on the couch. This was a house that I was paying the rent for, which he refused to. That was another thing I used to have to stand. I remember being stood with a bank statement, having to go through it with a fine tooth comb when I'd asked for some money towards the house. And he was like, well, I pay for your holidays and all this stuff, but I was paying rent. He was renting his house out that he had a mortgage on. He had no rent to pay. Like, I had to pay all the bills. You know, when he was away, because he worked away a lot, I had to pay for everything, you know. And and just all this stuff kept adding up. And I was just so anxious. I couldn't go to uni. I couldn't hardly go to uni anymore. I only just finished my degree. I was a quivering wreck. And he'd come back, like I say, and I kicked him out, and I was screaming for him to get out my house. And a neighbour ended up coming round, and it just pushed me, and I'd flown across the kitchen floor. And he went, and then the following morning, I thought, oh God, what have I done? Blame myself.
Blaming yourself,
It's all my fault. My daughter had her dad back. We were supposed to be going to Florida. You know, look what I've done again. And I rang him, and he literally tore me to pieces. What would I want to be, a daft little thing like it? You know, what would I want to be with a daft little girl like you? You're a little girl. You're a little girl. You're a slag. You're this. You're that, and whatnot. And I got off the phone and I rang my friend and I went, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she'd stayed really reserved around it all. I went, I don't know what I'm going to do without him. What am I going to do? She went, Sarah, what have you done all your life? She said, you've always come through. She said, and she tried talking to me. And then in the end she went, Sarah, I need to tell you now. And she talked everything through with me. And I remember specifically I was on the phone 75 minutes, and that 75 minutes changed my life. And she went through everything. She showed me the domestic abuse cycles, and she explained everything to me, and it just twigged. So she knew when the right time was to do it, because if she'd have done it before,
you wouldn't have listened.
And I'd have probably backed away from her. And isolated away from her. Because I did with my parents. You know. But like, and it just, and that's when I knew. I knew I had to go away, and I went and slept at a friend's house. I think I was there about 3 nights, and all I did was drink from morning till night. And while I was away at a friend's, he'd put like a big garage shed in my back garden, and he'd just torn it down and took the stuff without waiting for me to come and take it. So all my belongings was just all over my garden. just the lot. And yeah, and I knew that had to be it.
Yeah.
I knew that had to be it. And then there was just more gaslighting, more abusive behaviour. And in the end, I had to come to the decision where, after all them years, I had to stop my daughter from seeing him. I had to, because she'd literally, my daughter hadn't spoken to me properly for about 6 months, and she was 11.
Yeah.
You know, and that is not normal. That is not normal for 11-year-old not to want to go to her mum.
Yeah.
It was just so...
So had he been saying things to your daughter about you then to get her on his side sort of thing? You know, you talk about the coercion. If you can be manipulated, how easy will it be to manipulate an 11-year-old child?
What he was very clever at doing was, if I tried to discipline Christina, or like, he'd wrap her up in his arms, and it'd be, oh, come on, Dan.
You've not done anything wrong.
Doing everything for her. You know, they would sit and debate what she was going to have for her dinner for about an hour and a half. I didn't have that type of time.
Yeah.
I was at uni. I was DJing, you know, to try and earn some money because I didn't get any help with the house. And I was constantly on demand. Constantly, all the time. Yeah, and it was just awful. It was just awful.
So you talk about the substance misuse as well. You talk about how you used together. I imagine that throughout this relationship, and because of the abuse, you found an escapism in substances. And obviously you're using together as well, so it's not just escapism, it's almost bonding. It's codependency, as you know, as you've described it in the past. Talk to me a little bit about codependency. Do you know, you've said here that I've got a quote from you saying codependency is the root of all addictions. Now, we haven't gone too much into your addictions here, but without even talking about it, I can completely understand how addictions to substances are occurring throughout this entire 13-year relationship that you've had. Talk to me a little bit about codependency.
So I've done a lot of work on it over the last 18 months. I wasn't aware it was something like I suffered with. But what I've learned is, through kind of adverse childhood experiences, the trauma kind of leads to feeling like there's something missing. You know, I've talked a lot about throughout this podcast, that gap, that void. And I've just always wanted to fill that. And for me, it was people, but then it was also drugs. And I believe that that's why it's the root of all addictions, because when you're codependent, you feel you have that void and you try to fill it. People fill it with gambling, people fill it with people fill it with sex, you know, whatever, food, whatever works for them. You know, and it's that feeling of wanting to feel whole. You know, as well as that one relationship, I was in and out of abusive relationships. I would literally be with him. We'd split up. I would get with somebody because I went out with people who had drugs. You know?
So you're always going to be with people where there are going to be some instability and some, you know, trauma that's going to be projected onto yourself as well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you attract these things, but to go from, and you're not the only person who's experienced this, but to go from one unhealthy relationship to multiple unhealthy relationships, why do you think that happens? Whether it be your own experiences or with people in general, why do you think they can move from one unhealthy relationship to another? Because I think when we talk about probability, the chance of being with someone who's abusive and then your next relationship being abusive and your next relationship being abusive, don't get me wrong, the chance is still high, but it's also quite slim at the same time. There's something about the people, as you said, people who are, you know, using drugs as well and being attracted to those people, why that pattern is kind of happening. But why do you think you was attracted to those people?
Because it's what was familiar to me.
Yeah. It's all you'd known, sort of thing.
All I'd known from being a kid.
And would you say that you'd those relationships, whilst they was abusive, they felt normal to you?
Yeah.
So every relationship that you went in, that just felt like this is what a relationship is?
Yeah. If I was with anybody nice, I didn't want to know.
How come?
Well, the work I've done on myself, I've come to realise I don't think I deserved it.
Okay.
And it didn't feel familiar to me.
So it was about familiarity and things like that then?
I remember going out with a guy when I was about 16, and it was the only boyfriend that my dad ever liked. And he was amazing. And you know what? Like, he's married and stuff now. And like, and I'm in a, you know, a really healthy, loving relationship now. But like, as I got older, I thought, like, that's how I should have been treated.
That was the fork in the road sort of thing?
Yeah. That was, you know, that was the type of person I should have been with.
Yeah.
You know, but it wasn't familiar to me. And I think, because I'd got away when I'd first got away from the guy who I was with on and off for years, I lost my dad really suddenly when I was 22. And my dad was my life. It was my hero. It was my saviour. It was my everything. And that just absolutely floored me. And I'd used previously, but I'd never used to black out ever. You know, I was a bit of an animal, bit of a party animal.
Yeah.
But I knew when to put it down. Do you know?
Yeah.
And that is when that massive trauma completely just wiped me out. Because it was very sudden. I got a phone call to say he was being rushed to hospital. I got to the hospital and he was dead. And that night changed my life, like forever. And that's when I started drinking to blackout, and that's when I completely stopped caring about myself. And, you know, looking back, I'd always felt kind of like abandoned because I had this void. So when people left, codependency, you know, if somebody leaves, even when you want them to leave, it still feels like a massive gap. So you feel like you want them back, even though you don't. There's something missing. There's something missing deep down inside. And
you think them coming back will fill that void sort of thing?
Yeah.
Despite what behaviour they, you know, project onto yourself in terms of the abuse, whether it be verbal, physical.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, I didn't feel like I had a protector anymore, because for me, I'd been that little girl who watched loads of Disney films and the man always comes and saves you and all this stuff. And I never thought I could save myself, even though I have done. And I know that I can do that now. Yeah. I didn't know that. So I thought that's what my dad was there for. So when he went, I just felt completely abandoned. Yeah, it's literally like I've had a lot of bad things happen in my life, but I'd say up until like this year, it's like been absolutely the worst. Me losing my dad, like there aren't even words to describe it. And if I could literally have one wish in the world, it would be to bring him back. Even now, like I still miss him every day now. And it's like, and as a codependent, that's really difficult. You know, not being able to have somebody there who you're desperately craving for. And knowing that he can never come back. And it was just the biggest shock of my life, because he was quite a young-looking guy. We thought he was fit. He had heart disease and we didn't know. Just started suddenly with a heart attack. He was unconscious. And it's one of them things that you see on the TV and you think, and you never, ever in this life think it would ever happen to you. You know, my dad was this big, strong, invincible guy who sorted everything. You know, he paid for the house, he paid for the bills, he made sure, you know, he trained me at running as I was growing up, you know, he did every, you know, he was like, he was my mum's husband and, you know, and
he sounds like, as well, for a long period of your life, he's been the only healthy male figure in that life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, and I had my granddad, but I lost him, and then I had an uncle I was really close to, and then I lost him to alcohol in 2015. So that was difficult as well. And I think I kind of like, I felt so much pressure because I'd just lost my dad. My daughter was 2 years old. Just all the pressure, you know, I was worried about my mum. I moved in with my mum. I'm not going to say that was totally selfless. I think I just wanted to get myself back on track as well because I wasn't perfect at the time, a little bit behind in rent and stuff like that. So I can't say I fully did it for my mum because that'd be me lying. You know, I suppose I wanted to be with my mum, you know, but that didn't last long. It was 3 months and she'd had enough of me. So, yeah, I'd had to find somewhere to live because over the years, mine and my mum's relationship, it's been difficult because she's got her beliefs, I've got my beliefs. And I think losing a parent, I know it's not as young as some people, but
I don't think it matters at what age that happens.
It was just, it was just one of them things you never, ever think is going to happen to you. Like, ever.
And you always think they're going to be around forever as well. I think that's a natural thing, and I do it now. I'd probably take my parents for granted in some respect. Maybe I should pick up the phone and ring my dad a little bit more, but in my head, I've got plenty of time. He's always going to be there. But you have these conversations, and much like you experience, you never know what's around the corner, do you?
You do, but also on the flip side, I think through doing the codependency work, you do need, like, I've realised I need to do what's right for me today. I've adapted to worrying about everybody else, you know, and it was kind of all for selfish reasons because it was fulfilling something within me. But I can't blame myself because it's just a way I'd adapted to living. It's a way I'd adapted to surviving. Was if I do this for this person, I'm going to be in their good books, you know, they're going to be in my life. So if I just keep doing this for them, and I was that scared of abandonment, I would just keep doing and doing and doing and doing to absolute detriment of myself, you know. And and I didn't look after myself when I lost my dad. I didn't grieve properly. The job I was in at the time, I'd literally had a week off and they were ringing me to come back. I didn't want to go back. I was working 40 hours a week. Like, looking back now, if it was now, people would be, like, unions would be saying, right, you need to take them to, you know. But at the time, I was just that all over the place. I just didn't. So, I think the pain of that will never go away. And I think from that, even when I've come into recovery, I've made mistakes. You know, because I've not realised stuff because of the codependency and wanting that need to fulfil, I've not been aware of my surroundings and aware of how people actually do treat me. When I came into recovery, I'd not been in recovery long, only a few months, and I got into a relationship with somebody who had a lot of years behind him. So I thought they knew best. obviously thought they knew best, and I put them on a pedestal. And again, me being codependent but not realising, you know, and when I say that, I don't want it to come across that this was ever my fault, because it's the perpetrator's fault.
Yeah.
It's never, ever the victim's fault.
It does sound like you're blaming yourself a lot when you talk about this. And I know you don't.
Yeah.
But the way it's worded sometimes, it's almost like you still have that idea that you are somehow at fault in some of this stuff.
I think that's deeply ingrained stuff. And I think it's since I've come into recovery as well, because some of the recovery stuff for me, it doesn't bode well with me because the full blame's on you. Yeah. It's all your fault. Yeah. You're the reason why.
Yeah, it's quite, I guess, you know, we'll come up to talk about a 12-step program a little bit later on, but there's so much about that, about accepting, you know, your responsibility in this. And I guess, you know, there is some truth in that, but for someone who's been in a domestically abusive relationship for 13 years and a byproduct of that trauma is, you know, losing yourself in substance misuse and addiction, it's a very a contradiction.
Yeah, and my belief is trauma is the reason for addiction. Gabba mater, absolutely love gabba mater. I'm not, my trauma is. And if I don't know that, that's not my fault. Yeah. You know, I remember, like I said, I was in a cycle of abusive relationships. I was with a guy for about a year and a half, not long after my dad died. And we took a lot of drugs together and stuff. And I'd been on a night out, and so had he. And I'd come home early because sometimes I knew when to come home. Yeah. In the end, I didn't. It progressed and progressed, but I knew when to come home, and I'd come home and I was laid on the settee. And I remember him prodding me and me waking up, and I went, "Hiya, Dal," and he went, "Oh, what you doing?" And I went, "Oh, I was missing you. Like I've come home," and he just called me a slag, and he nutted me, and he constantly, repeatedly kicked me in my face.
For what reason?
I don't think he's not with us anymore. I don't think I'll ever get them answers. I literally, he did that constantly. And then I remember, because I ran into the bathroom at one point, locked the door, and he got in. Never done anything like that before. I stayed with him for a short while after that, like I did. Yeah. And nothing like that again. But it's the worst beating I've ever had in my life. The one I was with on and off for 13 years, that was more coercion and all that stuff. And it was almost as though he wasn't daft enough. He was that conscious of what he was doing. Yeah. The one I was with on and off for 13 years, he wasn't daft enough to raise his hand in the end. Well, he did when he was under the influence, but if he wasn't. But yeah, and
And just going back to that as well, just to touch on that, I think so many people, when they're in a relationship that is abusive but isn't physically abusive, will then not think it's an abusive relationship because they will excuse the verbal abuse and the coercion because it's like, oh, well, at least he didn't hit me. Because that is in our mind as well. I think when people talk about abuse, we instantly think to physical domestic violence, and we don't think about those other things. So I guess, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're in that relationship and you're not being physically abused, then it doesn't feel like an abusive relationship at the time. No. And was that kind of your experience? Like afterwards, then you realised all these little things. Yeah, that's interesting. That because I was going to ask if he was physically abusive, but when you said he pushed you on the kitchen floor, I thought he must have been. But yeah, that's interesting. That so you probably went through that. Because I guess the stigma of this as well is when someone's in and I've you know very much had this thought, you know, before I learned all of the things that I know now from working in this field, is someone's abusing you, just leave. Why are you going to stay there? If someone does that to you, why not just leave? And I think even now we still see it. It's someone's in an abusive relationship. It's like, well, then just leave the relationship. And it's almost like it's made out to be such a simple thing. Oh, you've been physically beaten, leave. Oh, you've been coerced, you know, you've been, verbally abused, leave the relationship. We know it's not that simple, but there is that idea that it is a simple thing to just leave that relationship. But so many people don't even know they're in an abusive relationship to leave it to begin with.
Absolutely. And you've got to think, this is generational stuff.
Yeah.
It was only the 15, 16, 1700s. If you was a woman and you disobeyed your husband, you would get dragged round by a metal bridle that attached to your tongue and your mouth. And you'd be dragged and shamed around that town, that city, that village. And that stuff doesn't go away, just like, the far right stuff don't go away.
Yeah.
It just turns into different forms.
Things, yeah.
That's all that happens. And now it is that coercion. I mean, thank God in 2016 it became a criminal offence.
Yeah.
But I was on something this morning. I only went on for the lived experience talk. And a woman shared that she's been out this relationship 20 years. She's only he never once laid a finger on her. She's only just started getting her haircut at hairdressers. She's still, the things that he said to her are that deeply ingrained. And when I've done like the 12 steps and stuff like that, they were written a long time ago, and I understand that, and I know things have progressed. But when they go into blaming you and it's you and it's you and it's you, when you've been in an abusive relationship and you've been coerced and you've been gaslit and you've been told everything's your fault, you're back in that place. You're back in that place of thinking, it is all my fault, they were right. I was always told it was all my fault. So you're back. And it's scary. It's a scary place to be. That stuff never goes away. It never. I'm in a relationship now, and I have to really work on this of not thinking and believing that he is this person that I have always been with, because I've been with people who were neglectful, emotionally unavailable, and then because I'm with somebody who isn't emotionally unavailable, who is emotionally available and whatever, and loves spending time with me, it's like, what do they want?
Yeah.
Ooh, that can
something's
come in
not right
all
here.
the time. Like,
what are they trying to get out of this? Why are they being nice? Do you know? Yeah.
There's always, and I don't believe that this stuff will ever leave me. And it's daily work that I have to do constantly every day to feel okay about myself. And people think that, well, I've had this said to me, but you always seem all right. And it's like, I'm absolutely not. I have to wake up, I have to meditate or do my kundalini breathing. I have to write gratitude every day. I have to practice what I've learned in recovery. It's exhausting.
The amount of work that you have to do just to present as and I'll use quotations for it, as a normal person.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. Do you know, I will have people say, oh, well, you don't seem like you struggle with this, you don't seem like you struggle with that. It's like, I'm an absolute shell. It's exhausting to be me, but they don't see the work it takes just to present as and I'm envious of normal people. Like, you get to behave like that, and you get to have them sort of that, you get to be at that level with no effort.
Yeah.
Like, fuck you. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want that. I wish I could be like that. Like, it's so hard to get to just this normal level. Going back to what you're saying, though, about your ex-partner, I think there's something in there about, you made a comment about he was too smart to not physically, assault you. I think that's where we are with a lot of domestically abusive relationships now, is because of the stereotype of an abusive relationship being physical. A lot of abusers are doing everything but the physical part, and they think they're being clever for it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going to name the name of the celebrity, but there was somebody that kind of, some text messages came out just about, it was a few months ago, maybe a year ago, and it was so subtle and it was so sly, but the way they had coerced their partner into not being around other men and not being around, and all this stuff and the drip feeding.
Yeah.
It's very, very calculated.
I just think it'd be exhausting to be that calculated as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll not being someone who, behaves in that way, I'll never be able to relate to it or understand it. But it's almost like the amount of effort you're going to be that way.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? As well, that's something I'd love to explore to someone. But
Yeah.
Are you ever going to get someone who openly says, yes, I'm an abusive person and here's how I did it and here's why I did it? I just can't see that happening. But
I think you do. And I think Strength to Change is a good example of that as well.
Yeah, you got a point there, actually.
Of people coming forward and admitting, yeah, it's very low at the moment. I mean, I have some I think people would say quite controversial views. Don't get me wrong, I am never ever taking it away that a perpetrator has made a conscious decision to do what they do. They absolutely have they are conscious of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But we've got to understand what's got them to that place.
That's what I mean, yeah.
And it's pretty much...
What was their life like, And is it learned behaviour? Because sometimes, you sometimes see that in adverts. There was an advert years ago and there was a clip and the dad's shouting at the mum and the mum's cowering on the floor and then it's the little child next to him shouting at the mum and the idea is that there's some earlier examples, like if you throw your rubbish on the floor, your kid throws the rubbish on the floor. If you don't stop at the green light, then the kid don't stop at and then it gets to the point where it kind of the behaviour builds up. So there is an example or an idea there that abuse could be learned behaviour. Now I've learned things from my dad naturally. I've learned a lot of things from my mum as well. Then there's a lot of external influence, social influences from school, from my peers. And I think you were in some way a byproduct of all those different influences and that's how you kind of be the person that you are. So I guess, when you say what is it that got them to that point, I'm not saying it is the parents' fault exactly, but I'd be looking at, I wonder what that relationship was like with the parents. I wonder what they witnessed as a child to then normalise it as behaviour. But again, to be calculated in the way that we was just discussing then, that's a different kettle of fish. You can't watch someone be a calculated abuser. That has to be something that you kind of, in some way, do yourself. And that's in my opinion anyway. So we've got a lot I still want to go through. And, you've openly talked about being a survivor of a rape attack. Would you be willing to talk about that today?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, we'd love for you to share it with others who might find it meaningful. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and leaving a review will help us reach more people and continue challenging stigma around addiction and recovery. For additional resources, insights and updates, explore the links in this episode description. And to learn more about our mission and hear more incredible stories, you can visit us directly at believeinpeoplepodcast.com.